"Sir, that meal was never meant for you." The words landed softly, but they cut through the quiet of the business-class cabin like a sudden crack in the glass. Danielle Brooks looked up from her seat, holding a fork above a warm dinner tray that had taken nearly 20 years of success to earn her the right to enjoy without explanation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply looked at the flight attendant standing beside her table, waiting for an answer. It was a normal evening flight from New York to Los Angeles, the kind of trip Danielle had taken hundreds of times. But tonight would become the moment that revealed a problem much bigger than one missing meal. Danielle sat in seat 3A wearing a simple black sweater, tailored pants, and comfortable shoes. No designer handbag. No security team. No assistant walking behind her. To anyone watching, she looked like any other professional traveler heading home after a long week. That was exactly how she wanted it. Because Danielle Brooks was not just another passenger. She was the founder and CEO of Aurelia Global Holdings, a company valued in the billions, and one of the most influential voices in the aviation industry. But nobody in that cabin knew her name. Not yet. Victoria Hayes, a senior flight attendant with more than a decade on the airline, picked up Danielle's untouched business class meal and gave a small, practiced smile. "We have a priority passenger who requires this option," she said. Danielle glanced toward the empty seat across the aisle where a white businessman in an expensive suit was waiting. Ethan Cole, a frequent flyer. A recognized face. Someone the crew clearly considered important. "I reserved this meal when I booked my ticket," Danielle said calmly. Victoria barely checked the tablet in her hand. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." But there was no confusion in her voice. There was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from believing nobody will challenge you. Around them, passengers slowly began to notice. A few looked away. Others watched silently. In the back of the cabin, Maya Richardson, a younger flight attendant, glanced at the service records. On her screen, her expression changed. She saw the truth immediately. Danielle's meal was assigned correctly. It had not been a mistake. It had been a choice. Victoria walked away carrying the tray as if the conversation was already finished. Danielle remained seated, calm and still. She had seen that look before. The look people gave her when they decided they knew her story before hearing her name. Years earlier, when Danielle was building her first company, an investor once told her she didn't look like someone who could lead a major organization. She remembered those words because they sounded different back then, but they carried the same message. You don't belong here. Yet here she was, sitting in a business class cabin, watching the same assumption happen again. Danielle slowly placed her hands together and looked toward the front of the plane. She wasn't angry. She was observing. Because sometimes the smallest moments reveal the biggest problems. And before this flight reached Los Angeles, everyone on board would discover exactly who they had underestimated. Danielle Brooks did not move from her seat. She simply watched the empty space where her meal had been moments earlier, listening to the quiet conversations spreading through the business class cabin. Some passengers looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. But nobody wanted to be the first person to speak. That silence was familiar. Danielle had learned long ago that silence often protected the person creating the problem, not the person experiencing it. Across the aisle, Ethan Cole opened the replacement meal Victoria Hayes had delivered to him. He glanced briefly toward Danielle, then looked away. Maybe he did not understand what had happened. Maybe he understood and decided it was easier not to ask. Either way, Danielle noticed. She noticed everything. For years, she had built Aurelia Global Holdings by paying attention to details others ignored. A delayed response from an executive. A customer complaint buried under paperwork. A small decision that revealed a much larger culture. That was why she had chosen this flight without announcing herself. She wanted to experience the airline the way ordinary passengers did. No special greetings. No meetings arranged before takeoff. No employees changing their behavior because they knew who she was. She wanted the truth. And the truth was beginning to appear. Victoria returned a few minutes later, holding a tablet close to her chest. Her expression remained professional, but her confidence had grown stronger. "I hope we can move past this," she said. Danielle looked at her calmly. "Move past what?" Victoria paused. "The misunderstanding." Danielle tilted her head slightly. A misunderstanding would be giving someone the wrong meal by accident. This was a decision. The words were quiet, but they carried across the nearby seats. A passenger in row 4 lowered his magazine and looked over. Another passenger stopped typing on a laptop. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted. Victoria noticed the attention and straightened her posture. "We have to prioritize certain guests," she replied. "That is part of providing a premium experience." Danielle looked at her for a moment. A premium experience should not depend on deciding who deserves respect. Behind the service area, Maya Richardson heard the conversation and checked the passenger service system again. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. The information was clear. Danielle Brooks had selected the special business class meal during booking. It had been confirmed 3 weeks earlier. There was no scheduling issue, no shortage, no mistake. Maya looked toward Victoria, then back at the screen. She felt a growing discomfort because she had seen similar moments before. Small choices, quiet assumptions, decisions that were explained away as policy. She stepped forward carefully. "Victoria, I checked the record. The meal was assigned to seat 3A. The cabin became still. Victoria turned around slowly. "Maya, I do not need you correcting me in front of passengers." Maya lowered the tablet slightly, but did not step back. Danielle watched the exchange without saying a word. She saw something important happening. Someone inside the system had finally chosen honesty over comfort. Victoria looked around the cabin, realizing more people were paying attention. Now, her voice became colder. "This conversation is unnecessary. We are following service standards." But before she could walk away, Maya looked down at her screen one more time and saw something that changed everything. There was a note attached to the incident report, a note that should never have been there. And it was about to reveal that this was not the first time a passenger had been treated this way. The note on Maya Richardson's screen was only a few words, but they carried the weight of something much bigger. "Customer complaint pattern detected. Review recommended." She stared at the message for a moment, then looked back toward Danielle Brooks, sitting quietly in seat 3A. Danielle was not demanding special treatment. She was not trying to embarrass anyone. She was simply waiting for the same respect every passenger expected when they paid for a premium service. Maya scrolled through the record carefully. There were previous complaints attached to the same flight team. Similar situations. Similar explanations. Guests describing moments where they felt ignored, dismissed, or treated differently after simple requests. None of the complaints mentioned a missing meal specifically, but they all described the same feeling. Being judged before being heard. Maya slowly closed the screen. She knew what she had to do, but speaking up meant challenging someone who had been with the airline much longer than she had. Across the aisle, Victoria Hayes noticed Maya's hesitation. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her tone sounded polite, but the message underneath was clear. "Do not continue." Maya looked at Danielle, then at the passengers watching the situation unfold. "I just think the record should be accurate," Maya replied. Victoria gave a small smile. "The record is accurate because experienced employees handle these situations." Danielle heard those words and looked toward the window. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft. For a moment, she remembered another office, another room, another time when someone had made a decision about her without knowing anything about her. She was 29 years old, sitting across from potential investors. For her first major business expansion, she had arrived early, prepared every document, and answered every question. But before the meeting even started, one person looked at her simple suit and asked if she was there to take notes for someone else. That moment stayed with her. Not because it stopped her, because it reminded her how often people confuse appearance with ability. Years later, Danielle had built a company that employed thousands of people across the country. She had negotiated major partnerships, transformed struggling businesses, and created opportunities for people who were often overlooked. Yet here she was, being judged again over something as simple as a dinner tray. Jordan Mitchell, a passenger sitting nearby, quietly lifted his phone. He was not trying to create a scene. He simply wanted to document what he was seeing. Did they really take her meal because someone else wanted it? He whispered to the passenger beside him. The passenger shook his head. "I do not know, but something feels wrong." The quiet conversations continued spreading through the cabin. Victoria noticed the attention and stepped closer to Danielle. "I think we are making this more complicated than necessary," she said. Danielle finally looked directly at her. "No, I think it became complicated the moment you decided the person sitting here was less important than the person across the aisle." The sentence landed differently. Not angry, not aggressive, just undeniable. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Maya looked down at her tablet again. A new notification had appeared. The system had just updated the incident report, showed multiple passenger concerns connected to similar decisions made during premium flights. Different names, different dates, different situations, but the same result. Certain passengers were treated as if they had to prove they belonged before receiving the service they had already paid for. Maya looked up at Victoria Hayes, who was still standing near Danielle Brooks with the same calm expression she had carried since the beginning. Victoria had spent years building a reputation as someone who knew how to handle difficult situations. But Maya was beginning to realize there was a difference between handling a situation and controlling a situation. Danielle remained quiet, watching everything unfold. She understood something many people missed. The truth usually reveals itself when people think nobody is paying attention. Victoria noticed Maya reading the report and walked closer. "What exactly are you looking at?" she asked. Maya hesitated for a second. "The previous customer notes." Victoria's expression changed slightly. "Those are internal records. You do not need to involve yourself." The words sounded like an instruction, but everyone nearby heard what they really meant. "Stay quiet. Do not challenge the person with authority." Jordan Mitchell, still sitting nearby, noticed the tension. He lowered his phone slightly and looked around the cabin. More passengers were watching now. The situation that started with a dinner tray had become something much larger. A woman sitting in a premium seat was being questioned not because she had caused a problem, but because she refused to accept being treated differently. Danielle finally spoke again. "Maya, may I ask you something?" Maya turned toward her. "Did the system show that my meal was assigned correctly?" Maya looked down at the tablet, then answered honestly. "Yes, it did." The answer was simple, but it carried across the cabin. Victoria took a breath. "Maya, you are misunderstanding the situation." Danielle looked at Victoria. "Then explain it." For the first time, Victoria did not immediately respond. The confidence she had shown earlier began to weaken. She looked around and saw passengers listening. She saw Maya holding information that supported Danielle's side. She saw that the conversation she wanted to end was now becoming impossible to ignore. Ethan Cole, the passenger who had received Danielle's meal, finally looked uncomfortable. He glanced at the tray in front of him and then toward Danielle. "I honestly thought there was an extra meal available," he said quietly. Danielle nodded. "That is exactly why details matter." The cabin became silent again. Not the uncomfortable silence from before. This was different. This was the silence of people realizing they might have witnessed something unfair. Maya continued reviewing the records, and then another entry appeared. It was not just a complaint. It was a supervisor note connected to Victoria's service history, a note that had been hidden from regular view. Maya's face changed as she read the final sentence, because what she discovered was not just evidence of a mistake. It was proof that someone had ignored a warning long before this flight ever took off. The final sentence on Maya Richardson's tablet made the cabin feel smaller. Prior supervisor warning, pattern of service judgment concerns. Review pending. Maya read it twice, hoping she had misunderstood. But the words remained exactly the same. A warning had existed before this flight. A concern had already been raised. And somehow, nothing had changed. She slowly looked toward Victoria Hayes, who was now standing near the service area, unaware that the very system she trusted was revealing the truth. Danielle Brooks noticed Maya's expression and immediately understood. She had spent years in business learning how information moved. People could hide opinions. They could hide intentions. But records had a way of telling their own story. "Maya," Danielle said softly, "what did you find?" Maya hesitated. She looked at Victoria, then at the passengers watching quietly. She knew that once she answered, the situation would no longer be something that could disappear with a simple apology. "There was a previous review," Maya finally said. "A concern was reported about how certain passengers were being treated." Victoria stepped forward. "That is not relevant to this situation." Danielle looked at her calmly. "If it explains why this happened, then it is relevant." Victoria's expression tightened. "You are making assumptions." Danielle shook her head slightly. "No, I am asking questions. There is a difference." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Danielle was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to understand how a person could look at a passenger, make a decision, and call it normal. Jordan Mitchell watched from his seat, still holding his phone. He was no longer recording because he wanted attention. He was recording because he felt something important was happening. The people around him were starting to recognize it too. This was no longer about Emil. It was about how quickly a person could be placed into a category before anyone knew their name. Ethan Cole looked increasingly uncomfortable. He glanced at the tray in front of him and then toward Danielle. I should have asked more questions, he admitted quietly. Danielle looked at him. Most people do not notice unfairness when they are the ones benefiting from it. Ethan lowered his eyes. He did not argue. He simply sat with the realization. Victoria took another step forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. This is becoming unnecessary. We have procedures for a reason. Danielle looked at her. Procedures should protect people. They should not become excuses for treating people differently. For a moment, nobody spoke. The engine noise filled the silence. Then Maya received another alert. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen. This time, her face changed completely. It was not just a complaint. It was a document attached from corporate records. A review request that had been sent months earlier and never properly addressed. Maya looked toward Danielle. There is something else you need to see. Danielle remained calm. What is it? Maya swallowed. The report was not ignored because nobody saw it. She looked at Victoria. Someone saw it. Someone approved closing it. The cabin went quiet. Victoria's confidence disappeared for the first time. Because the question was no longer whether a mistake had happened. The question was who had decided that the mistake did not matter. Victoria Hayes stood completely still as the meaning of Maya Richardson's words settled over the business class cabin. The confidence she had carried since the beginning of the flight was no longer as effortless. For the first time, she was not controlling the conversation. She was answering for it. Danielle Brooks remained seated, her hands resting calmly on the table in front of her. She did not need to push. She did not need to accuse. The truth was already moving on its own. Maya carefully turned the tablet so she could see the information more clearly. The report had been created 8 months earlier by another employee who had noticed repeated concerns from passengers. The details were not dramatic. There were no accusations of intentional harm. Instead, they described something quieter and more difficult to confront. Certain passengers were questioned more. Certain passengers were expected to prove themselves more. Certain passengers received less patience before anyone even understood who they were. Danielle looked toward the window and watched the clouds pass below the aircraft. She had built her entire career understanding systems. A company was not defined only by its advertisements or its promises. It was defined by what happened when nobody important was watching. That was why she had traveled without announcing herself. She wanted to see the experience from the passenger seat, not from a boardroom. Victoria finally spoke. That report was reviewed and closed. Maya looked up. Yes, but it was closed without a full investigation. The sentence created another wave of silence. Jordan Mitchell lowered his phone slightly. He could see the shift happening. A few minutes earlier, Danielle had been treated like someone who needed to explain why she deserved a simple service. Now the people around her were realizing she had been asking the right questions all along. Victoria crossed her arms. You are making this sound worse than it is. Danielle looked at her. That depends on what you believe the problem is. Victoria paused. The problem is a disagreement over a meal. Danielle shook her head. No. The meal was just the moment everyone noticed. Her voice remained calm. The real problem is how quickly people decide who deserves something before they know anything about them. Nobody in the cabin had an answer for that. Even Ethan Cole looked uncomfortable with the situation he had unknowingly benefited from. He looked at Danielle and said quietly, I honestly did not realize what happened. Danielle nodded. Most people do not recognize a problem when the system works in their favor. Maya continued reviewing the records, and then she found another entry. This one was different. It was not a customer complaint. It was an internal communication from the airline's customer experience department. A request had been made to review training procedures after multiple similar situations. But the update attached to the file showed something unexpected. The recommendation had been delayed. Not rejected. Not forgotten. Delayed. Maya looked confused. There is a reason this was never addressed. Danielle turned toward her. What reason? Maya hesitated before answering. The final approval came from someone inside this flight operations group. Victoria's expression changed immediately. She knew exactly what Maya had found. The cabin became completely quiet as Maya slowly read the name attached to the approval record. And when she finally looked up, everyone was waiting to hear one thing. Who had the authority to stop the investigation before it ever began? The name on the approval record appeared on Maya Richardson's tablet, and for a moment, she did not say anything. The cabin waited. Passengers who had been quietly watching now leaned forward, trying to understand what had happened behind the scenes. Danielle Brooks looked at Maya's face and knew the answer before the words were spoken. Victoria Hayes, Maya finally said. The name hung in the air. Victoria's expression changed, but only for a second. She quickly recovered and reached for the same confidence she had used throughout the flight. That does not mean anything, she said. I followed company procedures. Danielle looked at her calmly. Procedures are only meaningful when they protect everyone. Victoria shook her head. You are turning a simple service decision into something it is not. Danielle studied her for a moment. No, I am listening to what the records are saying. That was the difference. Danielle was not making assumptions. She was following evidence. Maya continued reading the internal notes. The original recommendation had been created after several employees noticed a pattern. The concern was not about one person. It was about a culture where some passengers received immediate trust while others were asked to prove they belonged. The review had been sent upward for approval. Then it stopped. The person who closed the review had written that there was insufficient concern to continue. But attached below was a second note from another employee. One sentence. The concern was never fully examined. Jordan Mitchell looked around the cabin. The story had changed completely. At the beginning of the flight, Danielle had been the person everyone expected to explain herself. Now she was the person revealing how the system had failed. Ethan Cole quietly pushed his untouched meal tray away. He looked uncomfortable, not because anyone had blamed him, but because he realized he had accepted a benefit without questioning where it came from. I should have asked, he said. Danielle looked at him. Awareness begins when people decide to ask. Maya stepped closer to Danielle. I am sorry this happened. Danielle nodded. Do not apologize for what someone else chose. Just make sure the truth is recorded. Those words stayed with Maya. Because Danielle was not interested in creating a scene. She was interested in creating accountability. Victoria looked toward the front of the cabin, searching for support from the other crew members. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The confidence that came from having control was disappearing. You still have not explained who you are, Victoria said. Her tone sounded different now. Less certain. More curious. Danielle looked at her. Does that change what happened? Victoria did not answer. Because that was the question everyone in the cabin was thinking. If Danielle had been a regular passenger with no title, no influence, and no powerful company behind her, would anyone have listened? Would anyone have cared? Danielle reached into her bag and calmly removed her phone. She did not call anyone yet. She simply opened a contact list that had been waiting since the beginning. Maya noticed the name on the screen. Her eyes widened slightly. Because it was not a customer service number. It was a direct line to someone who could change everything after landing. Danielle looked at the cabin, then pressed one button. Rachel, she said quietly. It is time to begin the review. And on the other end of that call, the person answering already knew exactly who Danielle Brooks was. The moment Danielle Brooks pressed the button on her phone, the entire feeling inside the business class cabin changed. It was not because she raised her voice. She did not. Passengers listening around them became even more focused. Jordan Mitchell looked at Danielle with surprise. He realized this was not someone trying to win an argument. This was someone trying to understand why the same situation kept happening. Victoria stepped forward again. This is unfair. You are using your position to intimidate the crew. Danielle looked at her. No, I am using the same system available to everyone. The difference is that now someone is finally checking the system. The response was quiet, but it changed the room. Maya looked at Danielle with respect. She had expected anger. She had expected frustration. Instead, she saw someone focused on fixing what was wrong. There is something else, Maya said. Everyone turned toward her. She looked at the tablet. The service change on this flight was approved shortly before departure. Victoria's face became serious. What are you suggesting? Maya answered honestly. I am saying the decision was not made because of a shortage. She paused. It was made because someone changed the assignment. The cabin became silent. Ethan Cole looked down at the meal he had received. He quietly said, So someone moved it from her? Nobody answered immediately, because the answer was already clear. Danielle picked up her phone again. Rachel, connect me with the operations team. Rachel replied, They are already waiting. Victoria's confidence faded completely. She looked around the cabin and realized something important. This was no longer a conversation between a passenger and a flight attendant. It had become an official review happening in real time. Danielle finally stood from her seat, not with anger, but with purpose. She looked at Victoria and said, "The problem was never the meal. The problem was believing nobody would ask why it happened." Then the aircraft announcement came through the speakers. The captain informed passengers that company representatives would meet the crew immediately after landing. Victoria looked toward the front of the plane, realizing the next few minutes would decide everything. And when the aircraft touched down in Los Angeles, the person waiting at the gate was not just a company representative. It was someone who knew exactly who Danielle Brooks was. The aircraft doors opened at Los Angeles International Airport, and the passengers slowly stepped into the terminal, but nobody moved on as if nothing had happened. The situation that began with a missing meal had become something much bigger. Waiting near the gate was Rachel Harris, Danielle Brooks's executive assistant, standing beside members of the airline's operations team. They were not there because Danielle demanded special treatment. They were there because the company needed to face what had happened. Victoria Hayes walked toward them with a different expression than before. The confidence she had carried throughout the flight was gone. For the first time, she was no longer the person asking others to explain themselves. She was the person who needed to answer questions. Rachel greeted Danielle quietly. "The review team has everything. The service records, the passenger feedback, and the internal approvals." Danielle nodded. "Good. Let the facts speak." That was always how Danielle operated. She never believed power came from embarrassing someone. Real leadership came from creating accountability. The operations team reviewed the information while Victoria stood nearby. The evidence showed that Danielle's meal assignment had been changed without a valid service reason. The internal review that should have examined previous concerns had been delayed, and the decision to close the earlier report had prevented the airline from understanding a larger issue. Maya Richardson was asked to provide her statement. She spoke honestly about what she witnessed. She explained how she checked the system, how the meal was correctly assigned, and how the conversation changed when she tried to correct the mistake. Danielle watched Maya carefully. She knew how difficult it could be for someone with less authority to speak against a person with more experience. But Maya had chosen integrity over comfort. That mattered. Victoria finally spoke. "I never intended for this to become such a serious situation." Danielle turned toward her. "I believe you may not have expected it to become serious. But that does not change what happened." The words were calm. There was no anger, no desire to punish, just accountability. The final decision came later that evening. Victoria Hayes was removed from her position pending further review, and additional crew members connected to the service failures were also placed under investigation. The airline announced new training requirements focused on consistent treatment for all passengers. Danielle did not celebrate someone losing their job. She celebrated a standard being restored. Before leaving the airport, a reporter who had heard about the incident asked Danielle why she waited so long to reveal who she was. Danielle looked back at the terminal behind her. "Because respect should not depend on a title," she answered. "If someone only treats you well after learning your position, then they were never respecting you. They were respecting your status." Those words spread quickly because they reached far beyond one airplane. Danielle Brooks had walked onto that flight, hoping to see the truth. She found it. She found a system that needed improvement, an employee who found the courage to speak, and a reminder that dignity belongs to everyone, not only those with influence. The woman they underestimated never needed to prove her worth. She had already built it. And in the end, the greatest lesson was not that a CEO could change the outcome of one flight. It was that even in the smallest moments, one person's decision to stand for what is right can change an entire system.